The MacBook Pro 16 versus the M1 MacBook Air. Do you need to spend upwards of $2,400 to get a reasonably powerful and quick macOS experience? Or can the $999 MacBook Air with no cooling system and no dedicated graphics card do just as well and save you tons of money? Today we're going to pit the most expensive of all the Apple MacBooks against the cheapest of all the Apple MacBooks. Is that fair? I don't know. It's kind of fair. It's kind of fair. So, can it? Let's find out. We slam things equally around here. What's up, everyone? I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. What's cool about this is these two laptops at their own releases were transformative for how an Apple laptop can be used and how Apple is back in the game of releasing actually useful laptops again. The MacBook Pro 16 took the old 15-inch line and completely revamped it. They replaced the much maligned butterfly keyboard, added in a functional cooling system, and they increased the size of the display while barely increasing the size of the overall device. This computer was absolutely a winner all the way around. On the other hand, well, it's the same hand, just in the other side of the desk. On the other hand, the M1 MacBook Air took a computer that could barely turn on without having thermal problems. I mean, you could not use most of the processor inside of the older version of the MacBook Air because of the heat. But now it's got an 8-core CPU, power that rivals some high-end desktop processors, amazing battery life, and it does all of that without a fan and also not thermally throttling. I said all of that up front. Like, we had a pretty long intro today because I really want to get across that both of these computers are awesome, as in inspiring awe. They are both great, and either of these could work for you to do real work. But that's not a fun comparison to make, and that's not a fun video to make. So here, instead of all of that normal, like, blah, we're all gonna get along stuff, there's no hand-holding here. We're gonna compare these two. We're gonna make them fight, even though they're both pretty okay. First up, let's cover the quick technical specs and ordering information, because we can't build the comparison house without a foundation of understanding. Wow, I am definitely watching a lot of woodworking tutorials right now. You can tell that some foundation and some building language is creeping into my scripts. The MacBook Pro 16 can be had in a variety of options. From the $2,499 base model with its 6-core i7 processor, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and an AMD 5300M graphics card. That will also come with 512 gigabytes of storage. You can take that all the way up to the minivan level of 8-core i9, 64 gigabytes of RAM, an AMD 5600 graphics card, and an 8 terabyte solid state drive, running in at a cool $6,700. Okay, so cool probably isn't the best term, but I'm struggling to think of a good temperature analogy for a laptop that costs almost the same amount as a car. The M1 MacBook Air can be had in less options. From the $999 base model, which I own, it has the 8-core CPU, the 7-core GPU, 8 gigabytes of unified memory, and a 256 gigabyte solid state drive. All the way up to its max. In this way, max is kind of a loose term. You only gain a GPU core, you can have 16 gigabytes of unified memory, and a 2 terabyte solid state drive, and that will run you $2,000. And I want to pause right here, because I thought this was funny when writing the script, that the highest end level of the MacBook Air is still cheaper than even a used or refurbished model of the cheapest model of the MacBook Pro 16. Man, computers are a crazy world, y'all. Okay, let's get into the comparison, and much like the last computer one was, I want to break this down and compare them against the 5 most important aspects of a laptop because, well, it's my video, my rules. I rule with an iron fist around here. First up, let's talk about portability. This one, I led off with this one because this one should be pretty obvious, right? The MacBook Air is a 13-inch Ultrabook, and the MacBook Pro 16 is a comparatively gigantic workbook. We need to come up with a better name for gigantic work laptops that can coexist as desktop machines. Workbook, that'll last for this video. Yes, the MacBook Air is much smaller, but does it make it more portable? Because I don't think that the two things necessarily mean the same thing. If we strictly limit ourselves to this specific computer and its size, yes, the MacBook Air is more portable. But that's not the whole story, right? Sometimes when we need to work or be creative on the go, the laptop by itself it might not give us everything we need. We'll talk more about accessory support later in the usability category, but what I want to mention here is if you are like me and the old eyesight isn't as good as it used to be, or you don't like having to hunch and scrunch over a tiny laptop anymore, you are absolutely going to need a few additional things to make the MacBook Air more comfortable and more functional to use. So I think that if you are someone that wants a more ergonomic computer system right out of the box and not need to carry around more than just the laptop, the MacBook Pro 16 does have a few key advantages for portability despite being bigger. Man, did you see how I tap danced around that? Wow, I'm getting good at this writing stuff. Plus, with its additional ports, you can get away with less dongles or extra attachments if you do need to use all 4 ports at once. Like, the versatility here is pretty good, and it means you need less stuff. Next up in the comparison, let's talk battery life. Here you might think that Gary, why are you even talking about this? Look, the MacBook Pro 16 has the legally largest battery you can have and still get this on an airplane. Of course, it has the better battery life over the piddly little thing about the MacBook Air. Heck, I bet the battery in the MacBook Pro is bigger than the actual MacBook Air. Look at this thing. This isn't even the size of the battery. It is, okay, it is bigger than the battery. Well, my friends, if that overly long sarcastic paragraph didn't clue you in, yeah, it's not the case. The MacBook Pro 16 does have pretty respectable overall battery life at roughly 11 hours. And you know what? For a huge laptop, that's actually really darn good. You gotta think about it. It's got a bigger screen to power. It also has that i9 processor that isn't what I would consider to be a power sipper, and having a full-on graphics card. These are things that gotta get their power from somewhere. So as much as the MacBook Air is about to crush it here, that's not to say the MacBook Pro is as bad. And let's say it all together. If you are someone that uses this as a working professional, you only really, and when I say really capitalized, need 8 hours of use, because you'll just charge it at the end of the day or whenever you get to where you're going or when you get back to your desk at the office. Battery life is all fun and games until the M1 computers step up, because while yes, it's smaller, yes, the battery's like half the size, yes, it's light enough to be confused for an actual small, like, paper notebook, the M1 MacBook Air has amazing battery life. And in this video, I'm making a concerted effort to not say phenomenal in this entire video. Hopefully, we won't know until after I'm editing this if I'm able to achieve that dream. This computer gets roughly 18 hours of life, and that's just amazing. Sure, 7 hours between the two doesn't probably sound like a lot, but in actuality, that's a whole nother business day. You could go a whole nother business day just on the internal battery here without needing to recharge. It's remarkable, and the coolest thing about this from a MacBook Air perspective is you don't have to pay more to get this extra battery life. The M1 MacBook and the i3 MacBook Air cost the exact same amount year to year, but you get so much more, and the most impressive of that so much more for me is that battery life. Okay, though, as a quick aside, I am actually running into problems here because the battery life is so long. I find that because it's so good, I charge it less frequently, and it just feels like I'm always low on battery life. I imagine there's some kind of tipping point where you get enough battery life, but it doesn't feel like you're always charging it. Obviously, I'm not always charging this because I only charge it like every other third day or so. But it's weird how quickly your perspective on this can change. The next thing we'll have in comparison is one that, again, seems like the MacBook Pro 16 would easily win, but the truth isn't as easy to eke out. Thermal performance on a laptop is make or break in my opinion. All the other stuff that we've already talked about and all the stuff that we will continue talking about, it doesn't matter if the computer wastes most of its potential because it can't properly cool itself. When it comes to these two computers, I will say that both are properly thermally managed. I've not had a single problem with either. The MacBook Pro 16, despite having an Intel processor that could double as a griddle on some other laptops and has doubled as one on some of those other laptops, this has a very robust set of vents and fans that make sure you are never in the danger zone. The MacBook Air, while not even having a fan, it just doesn't generate all that much heat during any activity not designed specifically to make it hot. Say, YouTubers benchmarking to see how far they can push it. That's really the only time you're gonna see this thing have any problems. And I was initially, when they first said there was not gonna be a fan on here, I was initially pretty cautious that this new radical design might not work out well in the long run. But As of now, I play games and I edit 4K video on my M1 MacBook Air and have had zero thermal throttling. I even do these things while sitting in my bed, which isn't something that I would ever do with any of my other laptops, because when you cover those bottom vents with like a blanket or something, laptops get hot, like burning yourself or super uncomfortable to carry hot. But you don't get that here. That's what I say makes the difference here. If both are properly cooled, the one that does it in a more pleasing and useful way is what I'm gonna call the winner. And while yes, even though I said it earlier, the 16-inch version works quite well, it does so pretty noticeable at times. These fans, especially when plugged into an external monitor, they let you know they're there and they will make a ruckus from time to time. This thing is dead silent. There is no comparison here. This is objectively better and it's so good. The MacBook Air is so good that I'm struggling to find other Ultrabooks that I want to cover this year. Right now I've got the Razer Blade Stealth 13. I was looking at buying a Dell XPS, but when you've got the 1-2 punch of battery life and an almost perfect thermal system, how do I compare this to anything else? That's not rhetorical, everybody. I'm asking, how can anything else compare? What can I get here to compare to this? Because it's like a monster that eats everything. Though, that 1-2 punch needs to be followed by an uppercut for it to be an effective combo. Yes, I took a boxing class once 10 years ago. Whoa, no, that was 15 years ago. I am getting old. The uppercut in laptop land is performance, because it's the one that knocks you out. Dad jokes. Much like thermal performance, actual like power performance on both computers is you will get what you pay for. I don't consider either of these to be especially overpriced, nor do I consider the power to be less than what you would be expecting. And I think that's a pretty good vote of confidence. The reason that I'm treating this section in a less number-focused manner is it's hard to compare the two apples to apples. Yes, I could throw up some numbers showing that in single core performance, the M1 processor is remarkably powered compared to similar Intel-based processors, especially Intel-based processors that fit into computers at this size and price point. And in multi-core scores, it also has power that exceeds those numbers in anything other than the top-of-the-line Intel-based chips, and it's really only AMD that will challenge Apple in the CPU market in 2021. I could do all that, but numbers for work computers, they don't really matter. They do not really matter. When it comes to performance, the only real comparison that can be made between the two is in the dedicated graphics card of the bigger brother. Yes, the MacBook Air has a 7 or 8 core GPU, but at the end of the day, it's still an integrated GPU. So if you have programs that require extra horsepower from something that's only job is graphics, then yes, the MacBook Pro 16 is still the better option. Maybe later this year, when we see the next iteration of the M1 computers come out, we'll have a dedicated Apple graphics card. Maybe it'll change the game, but that's later in this year. Today, in January of 2021, that's not the case. So yes, if you need the most absolute raw power available, the MacBook Pro 16 is still the best option. But if I can get a dig in there for the MacBook Air, for this size and price, this thing is bonkers powerful. Like it stands toe-to-toe with the MacBook Pro 16 for my major computing lift, which is 4K video editing. And to be able to do that on a $1,000 laptop that makes no noise and almost no heat, that's brain-shatteringly amazing. Like, I have no other way to say that, because we're not allowed to say the PH word, remember? And the last comparison we'll make today has almost been answered completely already, so let's just put a quick bow on it. Usability. Like I said, we talked about most of what I would normally cover here in the portability discussion, but there are a couple of things that didn't fit in there, but I still want to talk about, so we're gonna put them here. And I don't know, what is this? Gary, what is this? First, both computers do use Thunderbolt 3 as their main ports. The MacBook Air has 2, the MacBook Pro has 4, and yes, that is a pretty big difference considering the MacBook Air only has them on one side, which sucks real bad. What I think is the real win for the MacBook Pro 16 in this usability category is the M1 processor has a limitation on how many external monitors it can support. Right now, it can only support up to one 6K monitor. For me, I'm somebody that uses only one ultra wide, so that doesn't affect me, but it could potentially affect you. The MacBook Pro 16 can export to 2 6K monitors or 4 4K monitors, all through this one little port. That's the magic of technology. That is the future of today. Just one little Thunderbolt 3 ports gives you 4 monitors. Obviously, if you are dual using this as a laptop and a faux desktop, you'll want to customize your desk as much as possible, and more monitor support definitely allows for that. But at the end of the day, so what, right? Yes, the Apple that is the MacBook Pro 16 is more expensive and has more raw power than the much cheaper orange that is the MacBook Air. Apples and oranges. So why even make this video, Gary? Well, in my perusing of the internet, I think there's an assumption out there that to get a usable work computer, you have to get the MacBook Pro 16. Because of its status as the last remaining Intel MacBook that has the internal power and thermal performance to do what you might need, this is really the only option if you're looking for a laptop. But I don't think that's the case. I think the MacBook Air can stand toe-to-toe with the 16 in most situations. And in certain other situations, this totally blows it away. You can get almost the exact same power, but for way less money, that I think it is crazy to talk about the 16 as the only usable work computer. And by George, not Gary, but George, I'm going to keep banging on this drum until the whole of the internet changes its mind with me. I'm a stubborn person, and as you can see from my video list, I definitely want to bang on this drum. I easily recommend both of these computers, but it's easier for me to recommend the MacBook Air. This has changed the game for the Ultrabook category, and it has kind of killed off that market space because nothing I've seen as of yet this year, either as a rumor or as a verified release, comes anywhere close to what this thing can do. And if you like this video and you want to see more about these laptops and a variety of comparisons or whole other videos, guess what? Here's my MacBook playlist that will let you see all sorts of stuff. And you should click on it right now to go watch. Click, 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 click. Thanks for watching.